The candles on the long table at Marchwood Hall had burned down 2 inches since the soup course, and Lady Helena Whitcomb, Duchess of Marchwood, hostess of 17 years, mother of 3, and the woman who had arranged every detail of this evening, from the placement of the silver to the temperature of the port, was setting down her dessert fork with the particular precision of someone who has just made a decision she will not unmake. Across the table, her husband's voice had carried the full length of the room, not raised, not sharp, but entirely audible, the way a man speaks when he does not think he needs to lower it. She had heard the words clearly. The vicar beside him had heard them. The Admiral's wife at the far end had heard them. The footman standing at the sideboard had heard them, and had done what footmen do, gone still, eyes forward, as though stillness could make him absent. Helena's hand rested on the stem of her wine glass for exactly 2 seconds. Then she moved it away and folded her hands in her lap. And the expression on her face did not change at all, which was the most frightening thing anyone at that table had ever seen her do. It had begun as these things do, not with cruelty, but with carelessness. Helena had made a remark about the Admiralty reforms during the fish course. It was a measured remark, informed, the kind she had been making for 3 years at tables like this one. And for 3 years Ambrose had managed to hear it and redirect the conversation in the same movement, as a man redirects a river by placing a stone in its path. Tonight, he had said, audibly, that she was mistaken. She had let it pass. She had turned to the Admiral's wife and asked after her daughter in Bath. The conversation had moved on. 6 minutes later, pouring port for the vicar, Ambrose said it. Not to Helena, about her, to the table, in the conversational tone of a man making a mild observation about the weather. "You are not the woman I married. I gave her 3 children and 20 years, and obviously something has changed, and it is not me." 17 Forks paused. Helena reached for her dessert fork. She set it down on the edge of her plate with a sound so small and so deliberate that the vicar startled. She rose from her chair without assistance, smoothed the front of her gown, and looked at the table. Not at Ambrose, at the table, at the 17 people seated along it. "Then, perhaps," she said, "the contract requires revisiting." She paused. "Thank you all for a lovely evening. I believe I shall leave you to the port." She walked out of the dining room. Her back was straight. The door closed behind her without a sound. In the dining room, no one spoke for a full 10 seconds. The vicar reached for his port glass and found it already empty. Ambrose stood where he was, the decanter in his hand, looking at the closed door with an expression that a charitable observer might have called bewilderment, and a less charitable one might have called the face of a man who has just heard something break and does not yet know what it was. Helena went directly to her study. She lit 2 additional candles from the one on the mantel, sat at her writing desk, and opened the drawer where she kept her correspondence paper. She wrote 3 letters. The first was to Mr. Percival Thornby, her solicitor, informing him that she would require his counsel at his earliest convenience, and that the matter was significant. The second was to Mrs. Aldred, the housekeeper at Ashcot Priory, informing her that she would be arriving within 48 hours and that she would require the east bedroom aired and a fire laid. The third was to her daughter Cassandra, at her school in Wiltshire. A brief letter of the kind she had written every fortnight for 2 years, asking after her studies and mentioning, without elaboration, that she would be at Ashcot for the coming weeks and that Cassandra was welcome at any time. She sealed all 3 letters. She rang for the night footman. She instructed him to have the letters delivered at first light and her 2 largest trunks brought down to the front hall. Then she went upstairs, not to the room she shared with Ambrose, but to the guest room at the end of the corridor. And she lay down on the bed in her gown and looked at the ceiling and breathed very carefully for a long time. Ambrose did not come to find her. She was in a carriage before 6 the following morning, the trunks loaded, the sky still gray. The house was quiet. She did not look back at Marchwood Hall as the carriage moved down the drive, not because she was afraid that looking back would weaken her, but because she had already said what needed to be said, and there was nothing further to add. Ambrose did not come down. Ashcott Priory was 40 miles north of Marchwood, and it had been let to tenants for 11 years, and it showed. Helena arrived on a cold November morning to find the east wing with 2 slates missing from the roof, a dark stain spreading along the long room wall where the damp had come in, the kitchen garden gone entirely to dock and thistle, and a smell in the entrance hall of old paper and mouse, and the particular cold that comes from rooms that have not had a fire in too long. Mrs. Aldred, who had been caretaker since the last tenants left in the spring, stood in the doorway with a face arranged into welcome and apology simultaneously. "Your Grace?" Mrs. Aldred said. "Mrs. Aldred." Helena stepped inside and looked up at the ceiling, where a brown watermark spread across the plaster above the staircase. "How long has that been there?" "Since October, I believe. The east wing roof." "I shall need a full account of the damage. Everything. Roof, walls, outbuildings, kitchen garden, fencing. I want it written down by the end of the week." Helena set her traveling bag on the hall table. "And please stop calling me Your Grace. Helena will do, or Mrs. Whitcomb, if you prefer." Mrs. Aldred's expression moved through several adjustments before settling. "As you wish," she said. Helena paid off the remaining tenants' arrears from her own settlement funds that same afternoon, working through the figures in her aunt's old ledger, which she had found in the estate office under a layer of dust and a dead moth. The ledger was a revelation. Her aunt, Lady Frances Ashcott, had kept accounts with the precision of a woman who had managed alone for 30 years, and the records went back to 1801. Helena sat at the estate office desk until the light failed, reading her aunt's handwriting, and felt something she could not immediately name. A recognition, perhaps, of a woman she had never properly known while she was alive. Within a week, 3 things happened that she had not anticipated. The first was that a satirical paper began circulating in London. Someone at the dinner, she suspected the Admiral's wife, though she could not be certain, had written to a London correspondent, and within days a small piece appeared under the heading, "A Duke mislaid his wife at dinner." It was not vicious. It was worse than vicious. It was funny. The second thing was a letter from Ambrose. It was competent and reasonable, and explained in 4 paragraphs why her response had been disproportionate to the occasion, why she would be more comfortable at Marchwood than in a cold house in November, and why he expected her return within the fortnight. The third was Mr. Thornby's arrival by post-chaise on a Tuesday, with his leather case and his reading spectacles and his particular quality of listening that had made Helena trust him since her father's estate was settled 20 years ago. She sat across from him in the estate office and told him what she wanted. Mr. Thornby listened without interruption. He asked 4 questions, all precise, all practical. Then he said, "I will need to review the original marriage settlement thoroughly. There may be provisions of which neither of you are aware." "How long will that take?" 2 weeks, perhaps 3. "Then I have a reply to write in the meantime." Helena took a sheet of paper from the desk. Mr. Thornby, I would like you to deliver it personally. She wrote one page. She informed Ambrose that she would not be returning to Marchwood Hall, that Mr. Thornby would be in contact with him regarding the terms of separation, and that he was not to come to Ashcott Priory. She signed it Helena Whitcomb, not Helena, not your loving wife, not any of the closings she had used for 20 years. Just the name. Mr. Thornby took the letter and departed the following morning. At Marchwood Hall, Ambrose read it standing at the hall table, still in his riding coat from the morning. The footman who delivered it reported afterward to the housekeeper, who told Mrs. Aldred in a letter that the Duke had not moved from the hall table for quite some time after finishing the page. January arrived at Ashcott Priory with a hard frost and the sound of scaffolding going up on the east wing. Helena had hired the scaffolding company from the market town and a structural surveyor from Bath. And she had found, through Mrs. Aldred's recommendation, a gardener named Rook who had worked for her aunt for 12 years and who knew every inch of the kitchen garden and wept, briefly, when he saw what the dock and thistle had done to it. "We'll have it back," he told Helena, standing in the frozen garden with his hands in his coat pockets. "Give me the spring." "You shall have the spring and a proper wage," Helena said. "I want a full account of what seeds your ladyship kept and what we'll need to order." Rook looked at her. He had the face of a man who had worked outside for 40 years and had learned to read weather and people with equal accuracy. "She would have liked you," he said, meaning her aunt. "She said once you were the only one of the family who wrote back properly." Helena said nothing to that. She looked at the frozen earth where the herb bed had been and made a note in her survey ledger. She met her 7 remaining tenants in the courtyard on a Thursday morning in January, all of them standing in a row with the particular expression of people who are not certain whether they are in trouble. She told them she had reviewed the estate records and was aware that several repairs on their cottages had been deferred for 3 years. She told them she intended to address each one in order of severity, beginning with the Hatch family's roof, which Mrs. Aldred had informed her leaked badly enough to damage the floor. She asked each of them to give her a written account of anything else that required attention. There was a silence after she finished speaking, and then the blacksmith, whose name was Croft, said, "Written, ma'am. If you prefer to speak it, I will write it down for you," Helena said. "Either way, I want a record." Ambrose sent letters through January and February. She received 8 of them. The first 4 were variations on the theme of the first. Explanations, reasons, expectations of resolution. The 5th began to shift in tone, less explanatory, more uncertain, the sentences shorter than his usual style. The 6th and 7th she read and folded without answering, placing them in the drawer of the estate office desk. The 8th arrived on a Tuesday in late February, and she read it at the kitchen table over her morning tea. And the sentence that stopped her was near the bottom of the 2nd page. "I do not know when I stopped seeing you." She set the letter flat on the table. She put her hand on top of it, palm down, and she kept it there for a full minute, feeling the paper under her fingers, feeling the fire at her back and the cold coming through the kitchen window and the weight of 8 letters in the drawer upstairs. Then she folded the letter into quarters and carried it upstairs and placed it with the others. She did not reply. The stable roof was finished by the end of February. Rook had the kitchen garden turned and limed before the ground froze again. The east wing scaffolding held through the cold, and the stonemason confirmed that the structural damage was confined to the roof and the upper floor wall. Repairable, not catastrophic. Helena wrote all of this in the estate ledger in her aunt's tradition. Date Work completed, cost, name of contractor. The ledger was filling. Lady Constance Whitcomb, Dowager Duchess of Marchwood, arrived in the 3rd week of March. She came by private carriage without riding ahead, which Helena had expected, and she came alone, which Helena had also expected. She was 68 years old, and she had been managing the Whitcomb family's affairs, formal and informal, since before Ambrose was born, and she sat in the Ashcott morning room with her back very straight and her hands in her lap, and looked at Helena with the expression of a woman who intends to be kind and efficient simultaneously. "He did not mean it," the Dowager said. "Whatever he said, he did not mean it. Men say things at tables. It means nothing. He said it to 17 people," Helena replied, "and he was not wrong." The Dowager paused. "You have children. You have a title. You have a house." "I have a house," Helena said. She gestured at the window, at the courtyard beyond it where Rook was moving between the outbuildings. "I have it here, and my children know where I am. They visit me in it." "Helena?" The Dowager's voice shifted slightly, becoming the voice of a woman making a genuine appeal rather than a social argument. "Before Easter. Return before Easter, and this can all be managed quietly. The paper has already been forgotten." "I haven't forgotten it," Helena said. "And I haven't returned. Those are 2 separate facts, and they are both true at the same time." She stood. "May I offer you tea before your carriage is called?" The Dowager looked at her for a long moment. "You are not the woman I remembered either," she said finally. "No," Helena agreed. "I don't believe I am." Tea was offered. The carriage was called. Lady Augusta Whitcomb rode to Marchwood Hall in the last week of March and went directly to Ambrose's study without being announced, which was a habit she had maintained since childhood and which Ambrose had never successfully discouraged. She was 51 years old, and she had her mother's posture and her father's directness, and she stood in front of Ambrose's desk and told him the truth without preamble. "She has been becoming herself for 3 years," Augusta said. "She began reading parliamentary papers. She started corresponding with 2 of the reform societies. She formed opinions that were not yours, and she tried, at tables just like the one at Marchwood, to say them. You heard her and you redirected the conversation every time. She told me about it in October before the dinner." Ambrose was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the measured patience of a man explaining something to someone who has misunderstood, "Augusta, what happened at dinner was a result of Helena making a comment about Admiralty policy that was factually incorrect, in front of a guest who holds a senior position at the Admiralty. I corrected her privately at the fish course. When she repeated the comment—" "She did not repeat it," Augusta said. "She made a different point. You didn't hear the difference." "I heard it," Ambrose said. "I disagreed with it." "In front of 17 people?" He said simply, "Mildly." Augusta looked at her brother. She had known him for 46 years, and she had watched him be right about most things for most of them. And she understood, in a way she had not fully articulated until this moment, that being right most of the time had done him no good at all in this particular situation. She sat down in the chair across from his desk. "Ambrose," she said, "I am going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without explaining anything back to me. Can you do that?" He said nothing, which she took as permission. "The explanation you just gave me, the one about the Admiralty guest and the factual correction and the mild disagreement, that explanation is exactly what Helena left the table to escape. Not the dinner, not what you said, the explanation. The one you have ready before she's finished speaking. She has been leaving that explanation for 3 years. The dinner was just the first time she left the room as well. Ambrose was silent for a long time. Augusta waited. "She will come back," he said at last. Augusta stood. "I don't believe she will," she said. "I believe she is building something that has nothing to do with coming back." She picked up her gloves from the chair arm. "You should go and see it." She left. Ambrose stood at the window of his study and watched her carriage go down the drive and did not move for a long time after it had gone. In April, without writing ahead, he rode to Ashcott Priory. He arrived at midday and found the east wing scaffolding still standing, the courtyard occupied by 3 tenants discussing fence posts with a man he did not recognize, a new roof gleaming on the stables, and Helena, in a gray working dress, her hair pinned without a maid's help, her boots muddy at the toe. Standing in the middle of the courtyard with an open ledger in her arms, speaking to the blacksmith about something that involved measurements and a fence post and the boundary of the lower field. She saw him at the gate. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Not with surprise, not with anger, with the expression of a woman who has registered an arrival and is calculating what it requires of her. Then she turned back to the blacksmith and finished her sentence. When she walked toward the gate, the ledger was still in her arms. "You did not write," she said. He answered quietly, "No. I asked you not to come." "I know." She looked at him, at his horse, at the absence of a carriage, at the mud on his own boots from the road. "I will see you at 4 o'clock in the morning room," she said. "Mr. Rook will be present. Wait in the hall." She turned and walked back toward the house. He stood at the gate for a moment, then dismounted and handed his horse to a stable boy who had appeared from somewhere, and went to wait in the hall. The morning room at Ashcott Priory was small and north-facing, and at 4 o'clock in April it held the particular cold light of a room that has had a fire laid for a guest rather than a household. Rook sat by the window with his hands on his knees, not embarrassed by his presence, simply present. A man who had been asked to witness something and intended to do it properly. Ambrose sat in the chair near the door and waited. Helena entered at 4 precisely. Mr. Thornby came in behind her with his leather case. She did not extend her hand. She looked at the chair beside the writing table, pulled it back herself, and sat. Ambrose had risen when she entered and had moved toward her chair, his hand extended to assist her to it. 20 years of habit, the small gesture of a husband at a table. She looked at the hand. She did not take it. She sat. He withdrew his hand and returned to his own chair and sat down on the opposite side of the table. Mr. Thornby opened his case, then removed a document of several pages. He settled his reading spectacles on his nose and cleared his throat. "I shall read the drafted terms of legal separation," he said, in the tone of a man who has done this before and intends to do it correctly. "Her Grace has asked me to note that the terms are not negotiable at this meeting. Questions of procedure will be taken in writing." He read. The terms were clear and specific. Helena would retain the use of Ashcott Priory and its estate under a clause in the original marriage settlement that Mr. Thornby had located in the Ashcott family papers. A clause written by Helena's grandfather, granting sole use of the estate to any female Ashcott heir in the event of marital dissolution. Neither Helena nor Ambrose had known it existed. Helena had not known it existed when she arrived in November. Mr. Thornby had found it in January, in the 3rd week of his review of the settlement documents, and had written to Helena immediately. She required Ambrose's signature within the month. When Mr. Thornby finished reading, the room was quiet except for the fire settling. Ambrose asked 2 questions. Both were procedural. He asked about the children's school arrangements and whether Pip's guardianship terms allowed for his visits to Ashcott Priory without formal request. Helena answered both questions directly. Edmund is at Oxford and requires no arrangement. Cassandra visits me by her own choice and has done so twice already. Pip comes with Edmund or with his nurse. No formal request is required from either of us. The children are not part of the separation terms. Mr. Thornby's accompanying letter from Ambrose's own solicitor had included a query, read aloud at Thornby's insistence, as to whether Helena wished to reconsider the separation for the sake of the children's social position. "The children know where I am," Helena said. "They visit me here. I am their mother in this house exactly as I was their mother at Marchwood Hall. Next question." There was no next question. She set the separation document on the table between them and placed a pen beside it. The afternoon light fell across the table and across Ambrose's hands, which were still, and across the ledger she had brought in with her and set to one side, open to the page she had been working on before 4 o'clock. He was an appointment between tenant meetings, and the ledger made this visible without her needing to say it. Ambrose looked at the document. He looked at Helena. "I will return it signed within the fortnight," he said. "Within the month," Helena said. "Mr. Thornby will be in contact." She rose. Rook rose also by instinct, and then sat back down. Ambrose stood. Helena looked at the table and picked up the ledger and walked to the door, and did not look back. The separation papers came back signed in the 3rd week of April, delivered by Ambrose's solicitor to Mr. Thornby's office in the market town. Mr. Thornby sent word to Helena at Ashcott Priory, and Helena replied that she would be in London the following Tuesday to sign. She arrived at the Marchwood morning room alone with Mr. Thornby, having taken the post rather than the Marchwood carriage. The morning room smelled of beeswax and the particular staleness of a room whose windows had not been opened in weeks. Ambrose was standing when she entered. He was not in his parliamentary coat, but in his ordinary morning clothes. And he looked, she noted with the detached precision she had developed over 6 months, older than she remembered. Not diminished. Older in the way that a face looks when the certainty has gone out of it. She did not extend her hand. She sat. Mr. Thornby read the terms. Both solicitors were present by letter. The query about reconsideration was raised again, for the sake of the children, and Helena answered it in the same words she had used in April. "The children know where I am. Next question." She signed. Ambrose signed. Mr. Thornby witnessed. At the door, as she was putting on her gloves, Ambrose said her name. Not my dear, not Duchess. Not the half-dozen ways he had addressed her across 20 years of marriage. Just, "Helena." She stopped. She turned. Her voice was level. "Your Grace." Not cruel, not soft, precise. She left. Ambrose remained in the morning room. The clock on the mantel marked 40 minutes before anyone came to find him. June arrived warm and dry, and Edmund brought Pip to Ashcott Priory for a visit of 2 weeks. Edmund home from Oxford, Pip released from his lessons, both of them arriving in the Marchwood carriage with a quantity of luggage that suggested Edmund had decided to stay longer than 2 weeks and had not mentioned this. Helena met them in the courtyard. Pip ran to her immediately, and she caught him and held him. His face pressed against her neck, and over his shoulder she looked at Edmund, who was 18 and looked more like his father every month and had, she noted, his father's way of watching a room before he entered it. "You look well," Edmund said. Edmund. "I am well," Helena said. She set Pip down and kept his hand. "Come and see what we've done to the stables." The visit went easily for 2 days. On the third morning, Pip woke with a fever. Helena was in the nursery within minutes of the nurse's knock at her door. She sent immediately for the physician in the village and, separately, for Ambrose at Marchwood Hall. The physician arrived in 2 hours, examined Pip, and said it was not serious but required watching. Helena thanked him, paid him, and returned to the nursery chair beside Pip's bed. Ambrose arrived by evening. He had ridden rather than waited for the carriage, and his coat was dusty from the road, and he came directly to the nursery without stopping to change or eat. Helena did not rise when he entered. She was in the chair beside the bed, and Pip was sleeping, his face flushed and his breathing even, and the physician had said the fever would likely break by morning. Ambrose crossed to the bed. He looked at his son for a long moment, one hand resting briefly on the coverlet near Pip's feet. Then he sat down on the floor beside Helena's chair, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, in the way a man sits when there is no chair available and he intends to stay. Helena's hand was on the arm of the chair. She looked at the window. She looked at Pip. She looked at the candle on the bedside table. After a minute, she moved her hand down from the chair arm to Ambrose's shoulder and rested it there. Not stroking, not gripping, simply placing it, the way you place a hand on something to confirm it is real. They remained like that until dawn. When the fever broke, Pip stirred and opened his eyes and said, "Mama." And then, seeing Ambrose on the floor, said Papa with the particular satisfaction of a 9-year-old who has both parents in the room and considers this the natural order of things. Helena lifted her hand from Ambrose's shoulder. He rose from the floor, his joints stiff from the night, and stood beside the bed and looked at his son's clear eyes and said, "Good morning, then." Neither Helena nor Ambrose spoke to each other. There was nothing to say that was equal to what had passed. Helena remained in the nursery. Ambrose went downstairs, ate something in the kitchen that Mrs. Aldred provided without being asked, and rode back to Marchwood Hall before noon. It was the first time she had touched him in 10 months. The Dowager Duchess wrote to Edmund in July, a letter of 3 pages that Edmund read at Ashcot Priory, where he was still staying, and showed to Helena without comment. The letter asked Edmund to speak to his mother about the damage being done to the family by the extended separation, to remind Helena of her obligations, and to use, as the Dowager phrased it, his natural influence as her eldest son. Edmund wrote back the same afternoon. Helena did not ask what the letter said. She learned it later, from Edmund himself, who told her without embarrassment, "You raised a son who did not see his wife, grandmother. I would rather not become him." The Dowager did not write again. Edmund also wrote to Ambrose. It was a longer letter, and it took Ambrose 3 weeks to answer it. When the answer came, Edmund showed it to Helena as well, and she read it at the kitchen table in the evening light. The letter was shorter than Ambrose's usual correspondence and contained no explanations. It said, among other things, that Edmund was right, and that he was sorry, and that he was trying to understand what trying to understand actually required. Helena folded the letter and handed it back to Edmund and said, "Keep that." Ambrose continued to write to Helena monthly. Between July and September, he sent 6 more letters. She answered 4 of them. The ones that said something true, something specific, something that did not explain or justify, but simply reported what he had noticed or felt or failed at in a given week. The other 2 she placed in the drawer with the rest. In late September, Helena wrote to 30 people. The letter was a formal invitation to the first annual Ashcot Priory tenant dinner, to be held in October in the stable yard, in the tradition her aunt had kept for 30 years, which Helena had found described in the estate ledger and had decided to revive. The 30 names on the list were the tenants and their families, the parish vicar, Mr. Thornby, Rook, Mrs. Aldred, and several neighbors who had been her aunt's friends. The last name on the list was Ambrose Whitcomb, Duke of Marchwood. He replied within 3 days. He would come. The stable yard at Ashcott Priory on an October evening looked like something that had always existed and had simply been waiting to be found again. Long trestle tables ran the length of the yard, covered in cloth that Mrs. Aldred had laundered and pressed, and lanterns hung between the stable posts on lengths of cord that Rook and the blacksmith Croft had strung the previous afternoon. The kitchen had been producing food since dawn, pies and roasted birds and bread, and the particular Ashcott apple cake that Rook had described from his aunt's recipe, until Mrs. Aldred had reproduced it to his satisfaction. 30 people filled the tables, tenants and their children, the vicar, Mr. Thornby in his good coat, Rook with his hair combed, the widow Abernathy from the North Cottage, Croft the blacksmith with his wife and 2 sons. Helena sat at the head of the table. She wore a deep blue dress that she had made in the village, not London, and her hair was dressed with less formality than Marchwood had required. And she looked, Rook thought, like the woman her aunt had described to him once. Like someone who has come home to a place she didn't know was hers. Ambrose arrived on horseback. No carriage, no servants. He came through the gate alone, dismounted, handed his horse to the stable boy, and stood for a moment in the entrance to the yard, taking in the tables and the lanterns and the 30 people who had all, in some degree, turned to look at him. Helena did not rise. She watched him from the head of the table and waited. Mr. Thornby indicated the seat that had been arranged for Ambrose, and it was between Croft, the blacksmith, and the widow Abernathy, and Ambrose sat in it without hesitation or comment. He accepted the bread that Abernathy passed him. He answered Croft's question about the road from Marchwood. He ate. The dinner went on for an hour before the toasts began. Helena stood and raised her glass, and the table went quiet. She toasted her aunt, Lady Frances Ashcott, who had kept this tradition for 30 years and had left behind a ledger so thorough that a woman who had never managed an estate could learn to do it in a winter. The table raised their glasses. She toasted Rook, who had given the kitchen garden back from the dock and the thistle. She toasted Mr. Thornby, who had found a clause in a 20-year-old settlement that she had not known was there. She toasted her tenants, who had been patient with deferred repairs and had given her a written account of everything that required attention. Each toast was received with a particular warmth of people who knew they were being seen. She sat down. There was a pause, the natural pause of a dinner arriving at its end. And then Ambrose stood. The table went quiet in a different way. 30 people looked at him. He was standing between the blacksmith and the widow Abernathy, and he had the slightly formal posture of a man who has rehearsed this moment and is now finding that the rehearsal was not sufficient. He looked down the length of the table at Helena, and then he looked at the 30 faces between them, and he began to speak. 1 year ago tomorrow, he said, I was told by a woman whose name I had stopped using that I was not the man she had married. She was correct. I had not been that man for 9 years. I did not know it. I believe most of you knew it better than I did. He paused. I am not asking your forgiveness. You do not owe me anything of the kind, and the asking would be beside the point. I am standing up because I am sorry, not to this assembly, but to the woman at the head of this table, who does not require my apology either. She has demonstrated that thoroughly enough, which is precisely why I must offer it in front of 30 witnesses, because in a room by ourselves I would be tempted to explain it, and I have learned that explanation is not what is required. Croft, beside him, made a small sound that might have been agreement. "I am asking her," Ambrose continued, and his voice was steadier than it had been at the start, "to allow me to court her, not as her husband. I am aware that I have signed the papers and that the legal marriage is concluded. I am asking as a man who would like to become, in time, someone she would consider allowing back into her house. Not because he has a right to it, but because she has decided he has earned it. I have not earned it. I am asking to be permitted to try." He sat down. The stable yard was completely silent. 30 people looked at Helena. She picked up her glass. She looked at Ambrose across the full length of the table, and it was the first direct look she had given him in public since the dinner at Marchwood Hall a year ago. And it was not a look of triumph, and it was not a look of forgiveness, and it was not the look of a woman who has decided. It was the look of a woman who is considering carefully what she sees. "The gate is not locked, Marchwood," she said. "It has not been locked for months. You have not, before tonight, asked to come through it." She paused. "I will consider your application." She drank. The dinner resumed. Croft refilled Ambrose's glass without being asked. The widow Abernathy said something to him about the apple cake that required his attention. The lantern swung slightly in the October breeze. At the head of the table, Helena turned to Mr. Thornby and resumed a conversation about the east wing roof that they had apparently been having before the toasts began. 6 weeks passed. Ambrose visited Ashcott Priory 4 times. Each visit had terms that Helena had communicated through Mr. Thornby, clearly and without room for negotiation. He arrived on invitation. He stayed at the village inn. He came to the morning room at the hour she specified. And Pip was present for the first part of each visit until Helena excused him. He did not spend a night under her roof. He did not press for any arrangement beyond the one offered. On the 4th visit, he asked whether she would consider Christmas at Marchwood Hall. She refused. The children, she said, would come to Ashcott Priory. He was welcome to join them there. He did. Christmas at Ashcott Priory, the kitchen garden producing the last of the winter greens. Pip running ahead of everyone on the path from the church. Cassandra and Edmund walking behind their parents through the cold air. The priory lit from within against the gray December sky. Ambrose slept at the village inn and came each morning and left each evening and did not complain about any of it. In the 3rd week of January, on his 2nd visit of the new year, he found Helena in the orchard, examining the pear trees for the damage the first frost had done. She was wearing her working coat, and her breath was visible in the cold air. And she was running her fingers along a branch with the focused attention of someone who has learned a new skill and is still learning its vocabulary. He came to stand beside her. They looked at the tree. "The branch will need cutting back," she said. "Rook says it will fruit better for it in the spring." "He would know," Ambrose said. She turned to look at him then, directly in the cold January light. And he looked back at her. And something in the quality of the silence changed. "I am going to kiss you, Ambrose," she said. "The old terms are gone. Whatever this is, I am kissing the man standing here, in this orchard, in January. Not the husband I had." She took his face in both hands and kissed him once, slowly, deliberately, with the same precision she brought to everything she did now. When she pulled back, her hands were still on his face, and she felt the slight roughness of his jaw and the warmth of his skin in the cold air. "Call me Helena," she said. "Not Duchess, not my dear. Helena." "Helena," he said. She kissed him again. Then she released his face and turned back to the pear tree. "I'll need to speak to Rook about the pruning schedule," she said. "Will you be here on Thursday?" "If you'll have me," he said. "Thursday at 2, she said. "Bring your riding boots. The lower field needs walking." The following September, at the parish church at Ashcott, they married again. The same 30 people who had been in the stable yard were in the church. Helena walked in alone. Her solicitor, Mr. Thornby, had offered to accompany her. She had refused, politely and finally, on the grounds that she was not being given to anyone, and had not been for some time. She wore gray silk made in the village by a dressmaker, who had become, over the course of a year, something approaching a friend. She carried no flowers. She walked down the aisle of the small church with her hands at her sides and her back straight and her eyes forward. And she stopped beside Ambrose, who had arrived before her and was standing with Edmund on his right and Pip, very solemn in his good coat, on his left. The vicar, who had been at the dinner a year ago and had witnessed everything, read the vows with the gravity they deserved. The vows were ones Helena had written. Ambrose had received them in a letter in July and had written back, in a letter shorter than usual and containing no amendments. "I agree to every word." They included the promise to see her daily as the woman she was, and not as the woman he remembered. They included the promise to ask before assuming, to listen before explaining, and to name her specifically, Helena Ashcott Whitcomb, the woman standing beside him, in every decision that concerned her life. He said them clearly, without stumbling. After the ceremony, they signed the new marriage settlement in the vestry, witnessed by Mr. Thornby and the vicar. Ashcott Priory in Helena's sole name, its rents to her, her written consent required on any decision affecting their children. The document was clean and specific, and had taken Mr. Thornby 4 months to draft to Helena's satisfaction. They walked back across the field to the priory together. Pip ran ahead, his coat already muddy at the knee from some collision with the churchyard grass that no one had witnessed. Cassandra and Edmund walked behind, close enough to be heard laughing at something between themselves. The field was still warm from the September sun, and the priory stood at the end of it, with its new slate roof and its repaired east wing and its kitchen garden in the last of the summer growth. Ambrose walked beside Helena and did not speak for a while. Then he looked at her, and she felt his look, and she turned to meet it. And he asked with his eyes, the way he had been asking for 9 months. With his eyes, because he had learned that some things could not be explained into existence, whether he might take her hand. She gave it. She had not thought, when she set down her dessert fork at the Marchwood dinner table, and rose and thanked her guests in her capacity as hostess, that she would ever walk beside him again. She had been wrong about that. She was content to be wrong. That night, after the guests had gone and Pip was asleep and the new marriage settlement lay on the writing desk beside the candle she had lit, a knock came at the connecting door. She opened it. Ambrose stood on the other side, and he did not step forward, and he did not assume. "Ask," she said. "May I come in?" he said. "Tonight," she said, "and every night I invite you. You will be invited when I invite you, not before." She stepped aside. He came in. The door closed behind him. On the writing desk, the candle flame moved in the draught from the window she had left open. The same window she had opened on her first night at Ashcott Priory in November, against the cold. Because she had wanted the air regardless of the cold. And the flame bent and steadied and did not go out.